Hi, it's Matt from Sagebrush Coffee and welcome. Today's video blog is talking about coffee storage and a little bit about what coffee freshness really is. You hear fresh roasted coffee all the time and I want to kind of clear that up and talk about it a little bit. If you want to learn more about coffee, that's why we've created this YouTube channel, so that we can just kind of talk about some of the things that I've learned over the years with coffee. We'll likely bring in some other coffee experts and talk to them about coffee, as well as stay up to date about what's happening at Sagebrush Coffee. So go ahead and like, subscribe, hit the notifications button, and you'll be able to stay in touch with what we're doing here on Sagebrush Coffee's YouTube channel. So like I said, we're going to be talking about coffee storage and freshness. I actually want to talk about coffee freshness first, because I think that helps inform how we think about coffee storage. When you think about fresh coffee, you have to think about a little bit about what's happening with the coffee bean itself. When coffee is roasted, there's actually a process that happens right after it's roasted called the degassing process, where CO2 actually comes out of the coffee beans over a period of time. If you've ever brewed a pour over with fresh roasted coffee, you'll see the coffee bloom. You'll see when those bubbles are kind of percolating out of the top of the coffee, and that bloom is that CO2 coming out. Frankly, that CO2 doesn't taste awesome, and it kind of takes away from some of the development of the coffee. And as that comes out of the bean itself, it starts to completely develop its flavor. And I've heard arguments, there's probably debates all over the place. There's probably some people who have done the science behind it and said, hey, here's the actual time when this coffee bean has been properly degassed and will taste the best. I don't know what all of those answers are technically. What I can tell you is, from my experience, a coffee is at its best somewhere between 48 and 96 hours after roast. And it really kind of depends on the bean. I think the coffee process is impacted, meaning whether it's a washed coffee, a dry processed coffee, a honey processed coffee. And if you don't know what those terms are, I highly recommend you go to our YouTube videos. I put together videos that talk all about those. Listen to those and then come back. I think the process impacts it. In my experience, I've noticed that dry processed coffees take a lot longer to degas. If you have a dry processed coffee, the day after it's roasted, it's honestly not that good. I actually drank a cup of our washed Ethiopian. It's what I've been drinking all week. And the first day I was like, oh man, this coffee's not as good as I've been telling everyone it is. And by the third day I was like, oh yeah, no, I knew it was good. Like, it's really, really good. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time after the coffee's been roasted to develop its flavor. And so we pride ourselves in selling on-demand roasted coffee. We ship it the day it's been roasted. That's something that we take a lot of pride in. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the day you get it, it's at its best. And it doesn't necessarily mean if, hey, this coffee's been stuck in shipping and it's 5 days old, now it's no good anymore. You might be getting it at its best sometime within that first week of roast. That's something to pay attention to, is the degassing that comes off of coffee. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of what damages coffee, what makes coffee age fast. And really, it's oxygen and light. Going back to what I've talked about before, I don't really know the science behind this. I know I've read it and I kind of have forgotten over time what the science is that makes the oxygen and light bad on coffee. But I'll tell you what, if you have coffee that you store in a cool, dry place that doesn't allow a lot of oxygen in, and you keep some coffee beans just out on the counter, and you drink the cup of coffee 48 hours later, the one that was stored in a dark place without a lot of oxygen will taste better. No one is going to argue with that. You want to protect it from oxygen and you want to protect it from light, because that does, age the coffee a little bit. Which leads to the next area I want to talk about with respect to coffee freshness, which is what is fresh coffee and what is old coffee. I think that's kind of to the eye of the beholder. I have customers who will buy a 4-pound bag every 2 months because that's exactly what they like and it doesn't taste bad to them 8 weeks into it. And I think that's kind of important. And that's something that I push a lot on this channel, is trust your palate over the experts. That's something that I feel like I've done. I don't know that I would call myself a coffee expert. I don't run in that crowd, but I know what I like and I know what I can taste and I know what has developed over time. And I know for me, when a coffee hits somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks old, I just don't like it as much anymore, and I really want something more fresh. As a coffee gets older, it loses some of the vibrancy of the coffee, it loses some of the flavor profile, some of the things I really like. And so to me, that's what I call stale coffee. On the flip side of that, as it gets older, it gets a little bit heavier, it gets a little bit more rich. And so there are a lot of people out there that don't like fresh coffee because it's just not, like, they don't like the vibrancy that is what I like in my coffee beans. Are they wrong? No, that's just what they like. And I think that's important to think about as we think about coffee, is what do you like? Sample it. When you drink a cup of coffee and your mind goes, wow, that's a great cup of coffee. Think about all of the factors that went into it. Not just the country of origin, not just the level of roast, not just the process, not just the flavor notes that I note on the website, but how old was it? What was the date on the bag? And maybe that impacted why you like that coffee the way you like it. The last thing I want to talk about with freshness is espresso. If you're drinking espresso, sometimes fresh coffee doesn't work in an espresso machine. I've been trying to improve my skill pulling espresso shots. Like I said in the announcement video, we're hoping to open a coffee shop early next year. I'm really a coffee roaster, kind of a coffee importer. I'm not a barista. But as I've been trying to improve that, I've noticed how much of an impact the age of the coffee has on the ability to even pull a consistent shot. And what I've noticed is fresh coffee doesn't pull a great shot. And you hear this. I see espresso bars that won't pull shots on coffee that's younger than 3 weeks old. And I understand that. That whole bloom process that happens in a pour over or even in your filter pot, you'll have the bloom. That impacts the ability to pull an espresso shot and kind of makes it not work very well. And so if you're buying coffee for espresso, my recommendation is let it sit on the shelf for a week. Let it sit on the shelf for maybe even 10 days and use aged coffee because it's going to pull a much more consistent shot and be a lot easier to work with. Okay, so I think that kind of summarizes the information that you need to understand about what is fresh coffee so that you can think rightly about how to store coffee. My recommendation with storage, which I kind of touched on this earlier, is to store it in a cool, like not hot, not cold, but cool, dark place where not a lot of oxygen can get in. That could be like a canister with a degassing valve, a bag with a degassing valve, I guess that's it. But most people I would recommend storing it in a bag or a canister with a degassing valve. We actually have been very intentional about our coffee packaging. The reason that we use the stand-up pouches that we use are because they have a degassing valve so that the CO2 gets out, but it doesn't let oxygen come in. So it's a one-way valve. And I've heard some people refer to that as the smell valve because that wonderful smell of fresh roasted coffee comes out of that valve. Know that that doesn't let oxygen back in. The air that's in that bag when you get it is the CO2 degassing it. You push that out, and that's actually good. It helps get rid of the CO2 out of that coffee bag. We're very intentional about having bags, the stand-up pouches, that don't just have the degassing valve, but also are resealable. We don't like the zip tie resealable bags where you kind of have to roll it up and then fold the ties over. We don't think that creates a big enough seal to keep that O2, the oxygen out. And so we have kind of the Ziploc style bags. That's on purpose. Honestly, one of the reasons we don't sell canisters on the website, besides the fact that they're a real pain to ship, is we feel like we've taken a lot of time in our bags that we have to make sure that they check all of the boxes in terms of what keeps the coffee fresh, that we don't have to worry about transferring them into canisters. Which leads to the fact that the bags actually have a UV coating on the inside that keeps light out, which helps protect them. So if we talk about how light and oxygen are enemies to coffee, well, our bags solve those problems. They keep the oxygen out, they let the CO2 out, and they protect it from light. And so they really do help as much as anything for that amount of coffee. I think the only thing you could do that would be better than our bags is to find a canister that is a single-use canister. If you make a pot of coffee every morning, you use 55 grams in your pot of coffee, you put 55 grams into each canister, and that canister has some sort of a degassing valve on it. If you use those and you just package it all up, then you're not introducing new oxygen every day when you pull your coffee. If you do that, you're way more OCD than I am, but that's okay. The last thing I want to talk about with coffee storage, because it's the most commonly asked question, has to do with freezing your coffee. People ask all the time, will this coffee last a lot longer if it's frozen? And I guess the short answer is yes. The long answer is I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't put coffee in the freezer for a couple of reasons. One, the thawing out process kind of messes up the flavor profile. Two, goes back to the experience thing. Every time I've frozen coffee and thawed it out, I haven't liked it as much afterwards. I don't think it's really solving the problem. And three, generally coffee bags, coffee beans, whatever you store it in is kind of porous. And it's going to pick up the flavors of where it's stored. And a lot of times, even if you don't notice it, you're going to get some of the flavors of other things that are in your freezer, or you may even get freezer burn on the beans, and it's just probably not worth it. So unless you're thinking about storing beans for months on end, I just don't see any value in freezing your coffee beans. I think you're a lot better off making sure that they stay in the bag, stay sealed, and you only open it up when you need it. So I think that wraps up everything that I wanted to say about coffee storage and freshness. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, matt@sagebrushcoffee.com. Put a comment down below. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the notifications button so that as I produce more coffee information videos, you can get informed of it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for making it to the end, and have a great day.